The fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial's emergency room hummed with a kind of sterile indifference that made invisible people disappear even further into the background. December wind rattled the ambulance bay doors. Inside, among the chaos of Friday night trauma, a woman moved through the corridors like a ghost nobody bothered to see. Alara Thorne was 28 years old, blonde hair pulled into a regulation bun, scrubs 2 sizes too large hanging off her small frame. 5'4" on a good day, 120 pounds soaking wet. The kind of person people's eyes slid past without registering, without remembering, without considering for even half a second that she might matter, which was exactly how she wanted it. Mouse Girl supply cart now. The bark came from Dr. Richard Castellan, chief of emergency medicine, a man whose surgical skills were matched only by his legendary arrogance. 45 years old, silver at his temples, the kind of doctor who thought his MD gave him permission to treat nurses like furniture. Elle moved quickly, efficiently, keeping her eyes down. Grabbed the cart, rolled it toward Trauma Bay 3, where a motorcycle accident victim waited broken and bleeding and demanding attention from people who actually knew what they were doing. Her hands were steady on the cart handle. They were always steady. That was the problem, actually. Steady hands remembered things. Steady hands had muscle memory that didn't fade just because you changed your name tag and pretended the last 5 years never happened. She was halfway across the ER floor when her shoe caught on something, a discarded IV line maybe, or just the universe deciding she needed reminding of her place. The cart tilted, supplies scattered across the tile, bandages, syringes, gauze packets spinning like dropped coins across the floor. The ER went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. That particular silence that comes right before public humiliation. Jesus Christ, Thorne. Castellan's voice carried across the entire emergency department. Nurses at the station looked up. Residents paused mid-chart. Even patients in the waiting area craned their necks to see what fresh incompetence was being displayed. That's the 3rd time this month. Do you have any idea how much you just cost this hospital? Any idea at all? Elle knelt gathering supplies with hands that didn't shake, wouldn't shake, couldn't afford to shake. I'm sorry, doctor. It won't happen again. That's what you said last time. He loomed over her, his shadow blocking the overhead lights. I don't know what strings you pulled to get hired here, but you're barely qualified to work triage at a veterinary clinic, let alone a level 1 trauma center. Behind him, 2 nurses exchanged glances. One of them, Jennifer, mouthed the word mouse and made a squeaking sound. The other one laughed quickly, smothered into a cough. Elle loaded the last of the supplies back onto the cart. Stood. Kept her face neutral, her voice soft, her entire presence designed to fade back into the walls where people like her belonged. I'll restock from supply and sanitize everything. It won't delay patient care. See that it doesn't. Castellan turned away, dismissing her with the wave of a hand. And Thorne, next time try not to make us look bad in front of the patients. She rolled the cart away, down the hall, into the supply room where the fluorescent lights buzzed even louder and nobody could see her face. Her hand went automatically to her chest fingers, finding the chain under her scrubs. Dog tags. Old ones. The metal warm from her skin, stamped with a name and a number and a blood type that official records said belonged to someone killed in action 5 years ago in a desert on the other side of the world. She pressed the tags against her sternum and counted her breaths. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out. The way she'd learned in a completely different life, when steady hands meant the difference between men living and dying, when people called her Doc with respect instead of Mouse with contempt. The supply room door opened. Elle dropped the chain, let it fall back under her scrubs, turned to face whoever was intruding on her moment of almost breakdown. An older man stood in the doorway, 70, maybe older, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent outside in sun and wind and harder places. He wore a veteran's cap and a windbreaker, his left arm in a sling from what looked like a minor fall. His eyes were the kind that saw things other people missed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, you've been downrange. It wasn't a question. Elle's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Downrange, deployed, whatever they call it now. He gestured vaguely with his good arm. The way you breathe when you're stressed. 4 count in, 4 count out. The way your eyes track the room when you walk. The way you touch something under your shirt just now. He smiled sad and knowing. I did 3 tours in the Mekong Delta. Came back in '71. Took me 15 years before I stopped checking corners. You've got the look. Elle forced herself to meet his eyes. I don't know what you mean, sir. Sure you don't, he nodded slowly. Word of advice, though, from one ghost to another. You can hide from everyone else, but you can't hide from people who've been where you've been. We recognize our own. He turned and walked back into the ER, leaving Elle alone with her hammering heart and the dog tags burning against her skin like brands. She didn't have time to process the encounter. The ER doors burst open with the mechanical violence of an emergency arrival. Paramedics shouting. The controlled chaos that always preceded something bad. Elle stepped out of the supply room, instinct pulling her toward the commotion, even though every other part of her screamed to stay invisible, stay hidden, stay safe. The voice on the radio crackled through dispatch. GSW military transport, patient, combative, need all hands. Elle froze. Military transport. GSW. Combative. Her stomach dropped through the floor. Her vision tunneled. For half a second, she wasn't in Chicago anymore. She was in a different place, a different time, where military and gunshot wounds in combat meant things she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. She turned, started walking toward the bathroom, then running. Pushed through the door, locked herself in a stall, and pressed her back against the cold tile wall. Panic attack. She recognized it clinically even as her body betrayed her. Elevated heart rate, rapid breathing, sweating. The walls closing in. She controlled her breathing the way Bridger had taught her. Counted, steadied. The bathroom door opened. Footsteps. Thorne, you in here? Jennifer's voice edged with irritation. We've got an incoming trauma. Need all hands, even yours. Elle's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'll be right there. Make it quick. Castellan's already pissed at you. The footsteps retreated. Elle counted to 10, then pushed out of the stall, looked at herself in the mirror. Pale, drawn, terrified. She splashed cold water on her face. Gripped the edge of the sink hard enough to hurt. You're not there anymore. You're here, you're safe, nobody knows. Nobody can ever know. She dried her face, straightened her scrubs, and walked back into the ER. The ambulance bay doors exploded inward at exactly 8:19 p.m. The gurney came in fast, paramedics on both sides, one of them doing compressions, the other calling out vitals that made no sense. Blood everywhere. More blood than Elle had seen in 5 years of careful, quiet civilian nursing. The kind of blood that meant arterial damage meant minutes, not hours, meant someone was about to bossy if everything didn't go exactly right. And on the gurney strapped down but fighting the restraints with the kind of wild strength that only came from one place was a man in tactical gear. Not full uniform, civilian clothes mostly, but the boots were military issue. The watch was a Su Unto, the kind SEALs wore. And the small patch, still clinging to his torn jacket, half obscured by blood, showed a trident. Navy SEAL, Elle's world tilted sideways. The man was maybe 34, 35. Dark hair plastered to his skull with sweat and blood. Strong jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. Eyes wild, not seeing the ER, seeing something else entirely. Somewhere else. Some place where the lights were different and the sounds were deadly and the people surrounding you were enemies trying to kill you. Don't touch me! His voice was a roar that rattled the ceiling tiles. Get back! All of you! I said, get back! He thrashed against the straps. One arm came free. He grabbed the nearest paramedic by the collar, yanked him close, eyes blazing with something beyond fear or pain. Something primal and dangerous and absolutely terrifying to everyone in the room who'd never seen a human being in full combat mode. Security came running. 2 guards, both big, both trained in patient restraint. Neither of them prepared for what a Navy SEAL could do, even with a bullet in him. The patient's free hand shot out, caught the first guard's wrist, twisted it in a move that was pure muscle memory. The guard yelped, dropped to one knee. The second guard reached for his taser. No, Castellan shouted. He's in shock, medical shock, not... Don't touch me. The patient was on his feet now. Somehow the IV stand clattering to the floor, monitors screeching alarms, blood dripping from the gurney to the tile in a pattern that made Elle's professional brain scream wrong, wrong, wrong. Where's my team? Where's my medic? Ghost protocol. Where's Thorn? The name hit Elle like a physical blow. Thorn. Her name. Her real name. The name that was supposed to be carved on a memorial wall somewhere with a death date from 5 years ago. Everyone in the ER turned to look at her. Not because they understood, because it was her name, and why was this crazy patient screaming for a nurse? But Elle wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the patient, really looking, past the blood and the wild eyes and the tactical gear. She knew that face. Dominic Cade, Captain, SEAL Team 3. The quiet one who never complained, never questioned, just did the job and watched everyone's back and somehow always knew when someone needed help before they asked for it. Dom Cade, who should have died in Syria 5 years ago along with everyone else. Dom Cade, who was very much alive and currently about 30 seconds from either escaping the ER or getting shot by security or dying from blood loss, whichever came first. Nurse Thorne, get back. Castellan moved between her and the patient, both hands up in a placating gesture. This man is experiencing combat psychosis. He's dangerous. Let security handle. Elle stepped around him. Not fast, not aggressive, just stepped around like he wasn't there, like his authority meant nothing, like the last 5 years of being small and quiet and invisible had just evaporated in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She walked toward Dominic Cade while everyone else backed away. Corman, she said, quiet. So quiet that in the chaos of alarms and shouting and security yelling orders, she shouldn't have been heard at all. But Cade heard her. He stopped thrashing, stopped fighting, went absolutely still like someone had flipped a switch in his brain. Elle took another step closer. Close enough now that she could see the exact entry wound on his shoulder, the way the blood pattern suggested fragmentation. Not direct impact, the subtle signs of blast injury that civilians would miss, but anyone who'd worked combat trauma would recognize in a heartbeat. She spoke 6 syllables, 6 quiet syllables, in a voice that hadn't been heard in 5 years outside of her own nightmares. Desert Angel, Sandstorm Actual. The ER went silent, not the normal silence of shock or surprise. This was the silence of the world holding its breath. 40 people, patients and doctors and nurses and security guards, all frozen in place because something just happened and none of them understood what, but all of them felt it. Dominic Cade's face crumpled. The combat rage drained out of him like someone pulled a plug. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched, and his eyes, his wild, terrified eyes, suddenly focused on Elle with a clarity that was worse than the madness, because it was recognition and memory and grief all hitting at once. Corseman Thorne, he whispered. His voice cracked on her name. Doc, they told us you were KIA. They said you went down with Lieutenant Brennan. We carved your name on the wall. His legs gave out. Elle lunged forward, caught him, guided him back to the gurney with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from doing exactly this 100 times before in much worse circumstances. Ma'am, is it really you? Elle's professional mask was back in place. Cool, calm, competent. Everything she'd hidden for 5 years suddenly front and center because this man needed her and nothing else mattered. Easy, Captain. You're stateside. You're safe. Lie back. Let me see the wound. He obeyed instantly. Complete trust. The kind of trust that came from shared trauma and remembered competence and knowing beyond any doubt that the person telling you what to do was the only reason you were still alive. Elle's hands moved over his shoulder, his flank checking entry and exit wounds with the kind of practiced precision that made every doctor in the room suddenly realize they were watching something they didn't understand. 7.62 millimeter, she said, voice clinical, now all business. Entry right, shoulder, exit left flank. Fragmentation pattern suggests secondary IED blast, not direct fire. The wound track is lateral, not deep. She looked up at the nearest resident, a young woman who'd been staring with her mouth open. I need a trauma kit, now. The resident didn't move, still staring. Now means now. Elle's voice carried the kind of authority that made people jump, regardless of their rank or position. The resident scrambled for supplies. Dr. Castellan recovered first, pushed forward, his face red with indignation and confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. Nurse Thorne, what the hell is going on here? How do you know this patient? What did you just say to him? Elle didn't look up. She was cutting away Cade's tactical shirt, exposing the wounds, her hands moving with the kind of fluid confidence that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. I said what he needed to hear. He's calm now. That's what matters. That is not what matters. What matters is that you just, doctor. Cade's voice cut through, still weak, but carrying unmistakable command. With respect, sir, stand down. Castellan's face went from red to purple. Excuse me. Cade's eyes never left Elle. In Mosul, in Kandahar, in Syria and Yemen, and places that don't have names on any map. This woman was the one who kept us alive when everyone else said we were already dead. She patched half my unit after we got hit at the communications tower outside Aleppo. She read wounds the way you read x-rays. She doesn't need scans, doesn't need labs. She just knows. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Doc. Not nurse. Not even medic. Doc. The highest compliment a corpsman could earn from the men they served. The name you got when you'd proven yourself under fire so many times that your rank didn't matter anymore, only your skill. Elle's hands never stopped moving, checking vitals, assessing circulation. Her professional mask firmly in place, even though inside she was screaming. A young resident stepped forward, the same one who'd fetched supplies. Her name tag said Morrison. She looked at Elle with something between awe and confusion. You're military. Was, Elle said quietly. Long time ago. How long? Long enough. Elle placed her stethoscope on Cade's chest. Listened. Moved it. Listened again. Her eyes narrowed. Dr. Castellan, we have a problem. Castellan had been standing to the side, clearly trying to process what he was witnessing. What kind of problem? His breathing's asymmetric. Decreased lung sounds on the right side. Tracheal deviation starting. Jugular vein distension. She looked up, met Castellan's eyes directly for the first time since she'd started working at this hospital. He's developing a tension pneumothorax. If we don't decompress in the next 2 minutes, the pressure will shift his mediastinum and stop his heart. Castellan moved closer, grabbed his own stethoscope. Listened. His face went pale. Jesus, you're right. How did you? He shook his head. Never mind. We need or prep full trauma bay. I'll perform the no. Everyone stopped. Because Elle had just told the chief of emergency medicine no in front of his entire staff. Castellan's jaw dropped. I'm sorry, what? No operating room, no trauma bay. We're doing it here, now. Elle was already moving, snapping on gloves, prepping the site. Blast injuries develop tension pneumo faster than penetrating trauma. He's got maybe 90 seconds before cardiac arrest. Maybe less. Nurse Thorne, you are out of line. I am the attending physician, and I will... Doctor. Cade's voice again weaker now, his face graying. Let her work. Elle didn't wait for permission. Her hands moved with practiced precision. Alcohol swab, anatomical landmark identification, second intercostal space mid-clavicular line. The exact spot, the spot she'd found 100 times in worse conditions with worse equipment while people were actively trying to kill her. She looked at Morrison. 14-gauge needle, catheter attached. Now. Morrison slapped it into her palm without hesitation. Castellan grabbed Elle's wrist. Stop! You are not authorized to perform. Elle looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time since she'd started working at Chicago Memorial, Richard Castellan saw past the quiet, mousy nurse who dropped supply carts and kept her head down. He saw someone else entirely. Let go, Elle said quietly, or watch him die. Your choice. Castellan let go. Elle positioned the needle, angled it correctly, checked one more time, then drove it home with smooth, practiced precision. For one terrible second, nothing happened. The monitors shrieked. Cade's eyes rolled back. Someone gasped. Then air rushed out of the catheter with a sound like a tire deflating. Audible. Unmistakable. The sound of pressure releasing, of space being created, of a heart getting room to beat again. The monitors settled. The shrieking alarms dropped to steady beeps. Cade's chest rose in a deeper, cleaner breath. Color started returning to his face, by degrees gray, shifting to pale shifting to something almost healthy. Elle's hands were rock steady as she secured the catheter-checked placement monitored the patient's response. Respiratory rate normalizing, blood pressure coming up, 88 over 60, 90 over 62, heart rate dropping to 118, 110, 105. She looked up at Morrison. Get him typed and crossed for 4 units, run a full trauma panel, and someone call the blood bank because he's going to need O-neg until we can match him. Morrison just stared. Resident Morrison, Elle said, voice sharper now. Medical orders, execute them. Morrison jumped like she'd been shocked, started moving. Other staff followed, suddenly remembering they were medical professionals and not spectators at a magic show. Elle stepped back from the gurney. Her hands finally started to shake. Just a tremor. Just enough that she had to clench them into fists to make it stop. The entire emergency department was staring at her. Nurses who'd called her Mouse Girl 5 minutes ago. Residents who'd laughed when she dropped the supply cart. Security guards who'd been ready to tase a patient until she walked into a combat zone wearing nothing but scrubs and stopped him cold with 6 syllables. And Dr. Richard Castellan, chief of emergency medicine, standing with his stethoscope hanging useless around his neck, watching a woman he had publicly humiliated perform a life-saving procedure he hadn't even diagnosed yet. The automatic doors opened again. Wheelchair access, this time not emergency. An older man rolled himself in, pushed by a hospital volunteer. Full-dress military blues, despite the wheelchair. Chest covered in ribbons and medals that spoke of decades of service. Silver hair, weathered face eyes that had seen more combat than everyone in this ER combined. He took one look at the scene, the blood, the patient on the gurney, the young woman in oversized scrubs, standing there with shaking hands in the kind of haunted expression that couldn't be faked. Little Thorne, he said, his voice carried across the emergency department like he was used to being heard over gunfire. You're alive. Elle's professional mask shattered. Colonel, she whispered. Her voice broke on the word. Colonel Bridger. Colonel Garrett Bridger was 68 years old, retired SEAL instructor, the man who'd trained 3 generations of corpsmen to save lives under impossible conditions. The man who'd trained Elle when she was 22, and idealistic and believed she could make a difference. The man she hadn't seen or spoken to since the day they declared her killed in action, and she decided not to correct them. He pushed himself out of the wheelchair, waving off the volunteer. Walked toward Elle with the careful gait of someone who'd left pieces of himself on various battlefields, but refused to let it slow him down. Stopped 3 feet away. Looked her up and down with the kind of thorough assessment that made junior officers nervous. You got taller, he said finally. Elle laughed. It came out as a sob. I'm wearing better shoes, sir. Don't sir me, I retired. He looked past her at Dominic Cade at the trauma setup at the catheter, still draining air from the patient's chest. Tension pneumo. Yes, sir, sorry. Yes, Colonel. Blast injury. Secondary fragmentation from IED. The pattern suggested. I know what the pattern suggests. I taught you how to read it. Bridger looked at Castellan. You the attending, Castellan found his voice. Dr. Richard Castellan, Chief of Emergency Medicine. And I'd like to know what the hell is going on here. How do you know Nurse Thorne? Why is this patient calling her doc? What? This nurse, Bridger interrupted, voice carrying the kind of flat authority that made generals pause, is Hospital Corpsman, 2nd Class Alara Thorne, decorated combat medic, served with SEAL Team 3 from 2018 to 2019. Participated in 17 classified operations across 4 theaters. Holds the record for most combat saves in a single engagement. 12 men. Pulled them through a collapsed compound under sustained enemy fire while suffering from a concussion and 2 cracked ribs she didn't bother mentioning until the extraction was complete. The ER had gone so quiet Elle could hear her own heartbeat. Bridger looked at Elle, something soft in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I knew you survived the helo crash. Tracked the reports. When they declared UKIA, I knew you'd chosen to stay dead. I respected that choice. But damn, Little Thorne. His voice cracked. It's good to see you breathing. Elle couldn't speak, couldn't move. 5 years of hiding, of being invisible, of pretending she was someone else, and now here was the one man who'd known her before the trauma, before the loss, before everything fell apart. Cade spoke from the gurney, voice stronger now. Colonel Bridger trained both of us, taught us how to keep each other alive. He's the reason any of us made it home. He looked at Elle. Well, him and Doc Thorne. Castellan looked like someone had hit him with a brick. You're telling me this nurse, Corman Thorne, she saved 12 men in combat. 13, actually, Bridger corrected. But she doesn't count the 13th because he died 3 hours later in surgery. She's hard on herself that way. He turned to Elle. Still carrying that one, aren't you? Elle's hand went automatically to the dog tags under her scrubs. Bridger saw the gesture, nodded slowly. Brennan? The name hit the air like a bullet. Elle closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. This isn't the time, Colonel. It never is. Bridger looked at Castellan. Doctor, I need you to understand something. If Captain Cade is alive right now, it's because Corman Thorne diagnosed and treated a condition that would have killed him in the time it took you to wheel him to an OR. She did it with a needle and her training and the kind of calm that only comes from doing the same procedure under mortar fire. Castellan looked at Elle, really looked at her, seeing her maybe for the first time. I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing. Elle's voice was steady again, professional, distant. I did my job. That's all. No, Cade said from the gurney. Ma'am, with respect, that's not all, not even close. The hospital PA system crackled to life. Colonel Bridger, there are 3 service members in the main lobby requesting Hospital Corpsman Alara Thorne. Should I? Elle's face drained of every drop of color. They came, she whispered. Oh God, they came. Bridger's expression softened. They deserve to know you were alive, Elle. They deserve that much. I can't. Elle backed up a step, then another. I can't see them. Colonel, please, I can't. You can. Bridger's voice was gentle but firm. And you will, because they've spent 5 years thinking you were dead. They've named their children after you. They've carried your memory through every bad day since Syria. The least you can do is let them say thank you. Elle looked at Cade, at Bridger, at the ER full of people who'd spent months treating her like she was invisible and now couldn't stop staring. She looked down at her hands, still shaking, still remembering. I left people behind, she said quietly. I left Cal behind. You obeyed your team leader's final order, Bridger said. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. He moved closer, put a hand on her shoulder the way a father would. And the men in that lobby, they're living proof of that difference. So you're going to take a breath. You're going to remember who you are, and you're going to walk out there and face them, because that's what corpsmen do. We face the hard things, even when it hurts. Elle closed her eyes, breathed the way Bridger had taught her years ago, let the fear settle into something manageable. When she opened them again, some of the fear had been replaced by something else. Not courage exactly, more like resignation, or maybe acceptance. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She started walking toward the lobby, past Castellan, who stepped aside quickly, past the nurses and residents who parted like water, past the veteran in his wheelchair who nodded at her with the kind of respect that transcended generations. Bridger followed 3 steps behind, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to let her walk on her own. At the doorway between the ER and the main lobby, Elle stopped. Wow. Her hand went to the dog tags under her scrubs one more time, pressed them against her heart. Then she pushed through the doors. 3 men stood in the lobby, civilian clothes, not in uniform, just men, regular men with families and chosen lives they'd built after the war. But Elle knew their faces, knew them the way you know people you've bled with, suffered with, kept alive through sheer force of will when everything else said they should die. Staff Sergeant Wyatt Dalton, Petty Officer First Class Reed Ashford, Petty Officer Second Class Trevor Maddox, 3 of the 7 men she'd pulled out of Syria 5 years ago, while leaving 4 others behind to die. They saw her. The lobby, which had been full of low conversation and the usual hospital sounds, went silent. Dalton stepped forward first. He was 36 now, older than Elle remembered, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He stopped 3 feet away. Then slowly, carefully, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, blonde pigtails, gap-toothed smile, wearing a navy sweatshirt 3 sizes too big. Her name is Alara, Dalton said. His voice cracked. We call her Ellie. She's 4. And I got to meet her, got to hold her, got to teach her how to swim and how to throw a baseball and how to laugh at stupid jokes because 5 years ago, you held my lung together with your bare hands while bullets were hitting the wall 6 inches from your head. He held out the photo. Elle took it with shaking hands. Ma'am, Dalton said, and tears were streaming down his face now, and Elle realized she was crying too. Doc Thorne, we thought you were dead. We mourned you. We carved your name on the wall at Virginia Beach. He couldn't finish, just stood there crying, holding his daughter's picture between them like an offering. Behind Elle, the ER doors opened. Staff flooding out to see what was happening. This impossible reunion. This ghost-made flesh. Elle looked at the photograph, at the little girl named after her, at the life that existed because she'd done her job 5 years ago in the worst circumstances imaginable. She looked at Dalton and Ashford and Maddox, 3 men, 3 living, breathing men who should have died but didn't. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I let you think. Don't. Ashford stepped forward. He was 38, graying at the temples, wearing a Medal of Valor ribbon pinned to his civilian jacket. Don't apologize. You gave us our lives back. Whatever you needed to do after that to serve, to heal, to find peace, that was your right. We understand. Maddox, the youngest at 33, spoke last. I became a PA because of you, Doc. I wanted to save people the way you saved me. Every patient I treat, I ask myself, what would Corman Thorne do? And then I do it. Elle's legs gave out, just went out from under her like someone cut the strings. Dalton caught her before she hit the floor, and suddenly all 3 of them were there holding her up. These men, she'd saved these men, who'd spent 5 years thinking she was dead, keeping her from falling, the way she'd kept them from falling half a decade ago in a desert on the other side of the world. Behind them, Colonel Bridger watched with tears streaming down his weathered face. And in the emergency department, Dr. Richard Castellan stood with his staff, all of them, witnessing something they'd never forget. The rookie nurse they'd mocked, dismissed, treated like she was invisible, was being held by 3 Navy SEALs who wept like children at the sight of her alive. And on a gurney in Trauma Bay, 3 Captain Dominic Cade lay with a catheter in his chest and a smile on his face because his medic, his doc, his desert angel was finally home. The private consultation room off the main ER was never meant to hold this many ghosts. 8 chairs arranged in a rough circle, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of hospital coffee gone bitter in its pot, and 5 people who'd lived through something most humans couldn't imagine, now forced to exist in the same space and pretend the air between them wasn't thick with memory and blood and things that should have stayed buried. Alara Thorne sat with her hands folded in her lap, still wearing the oversized scrubs, still looking like someone who wanted to disappear into the walls. Except now, everyone was looking at her. Really looking, and there was nowhere left to hide. Colonel Garrett Bridger sat to her right, solid and steady the way he'd always been. Across from them, Wyatt, Dalton, Reed Ashford, and Trevor Maddox occupied 3 chairs like they were afraid to get too close, afraid she might vanish if they breathed too hard. Dr. Castellan had wanted to join them. Bridger had shut that down with a look that could have stopped tanks. This conversation is above your clearance, doctor, and below your need to know. So it was just the 5 of them. 5 people in a decade's worth of trauma filling the space between the coffee maker and the door. Bridger spoke first. He always did. That was his gift, knowing when silence had lasted long enough to become dangerous. Captain Cade is stable. Surgical team has him now repairing the entry wound. He'll recover. Thanks to you, Elle. Elle stared at her hands. I did what anyone would have done. No. Maddox leaned forward, elbows on his knees. At 33, he looked older than he should have. They all did. You did what only you could have done. None of those doctors saw the tension pneumo developing. You diagnosed it in 30 seconds and treated it in 60. That's not what anyone would have done. That's what Corman Thorne does. Did, Elle said quietly. Past tense. I'm not that person anymore. Bull. Dalton's voice carried an edge. Not angry, desperate. You're exactly that person. You think we didn't see? The way you moved, the way your hands worked, the way you commanded that entire ER without raising your voice. That wasn't Nurse Thorne. That was Doc Thorne. Our Doc Thorne. Elle's throat tightened. I haven't been your anything in 5 years. Because we thought you were dead. Ashford's hands gripped his knees hard enough to show white knuckles. They told us the helo crashed. Told us there were no survivors from the medical personnel. Told us Corpsman Thorne and Lieutenant Brennan were both KIA remains unrecoverable due to hostile territory. We believed them. The name landed like a mortar round. Brennan. Elle's hand went automatically to the dog tags under her scrubs, pressed them flat against her sternum, breathed. Bridger saw the gesture. We need to talk about that night, Elle. Really talk about it. Not the after-action report. Not the official version. The truth. I don't... Elle's voice cracked. Colonel, I can't... You can, and you need to. Bridger's voice was gentle but immovable. Because you've been carrying this alone for 5 years and it's killing you. I can see it. They can see it. Hell, everyone in that ER can see it now. You're drowning, little Thorne. Let us throw you a line. Elle closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids she saw sand, heard radio static, smelled cordite and blood, and the particular stench of a compound burning while people died inside it. Syria, she whispered. December 2019, Operation Sandstorm. Tell us, Bridger said. So she did. The mission briefing had been routine. Extract chemical weapons intelligence from a compound 12 clicks outside Aleppo. 12-man SEAL team, 1 corpsman, in and out before dawn. Simple. Elle had been 23 years old, 2 years in the teams. Engaged to Lieutenant Callum Brennan, the team leader, a man who believed in duty and honor and doing the hard thing because it was right. They were planning a wedding for when they got back stateside. Small ceremony, just family, maybe on a beach somewhere. She remembered checking her med kit 3 times before insertion, remembered Bridger's voice in her head from training. You're small, Thorne. Enemies will underestimate you. Make that your edge. Make them sorry. She remembered Cal kissing her before they loaded onto the transport helo. Quick, professional, but his eyes said everything his mouth couldn't in front of the team. Come back to me. We both come back. They hit the compound at 0200. Night vision turning the world green and grainy. The intelligence was perfect. Too perfect. Every room exactly where the briefing said it would be. Every guard at exactly where they were supposed to be. Cal had noticed it first. Whispered over comms, something's wrong. This is too clean. 30 seconds later, the world exploded. RPGs from 3 directions. Heavy machine gun fire coordinated in a way that spoke of planning preparation, someone who knew exactly where they'd be and when. The compound lit up like daylight, and in that light, Elle saw her entire team exposed, caught in a kill zone designed specifically for them. Ambush, Cal's voice over the radio, already moving, already directing fire, ready doing what team leaders do when everything goes to hell. Fall back to basement level, medical priority casualties sound off. Elle was already moving, muscle memory, training. The part of her brain that turned off fear and turned on something else, something cold and efficient and absolutely necessary for keeping people alive when the universe wanted them dead. The first casualty was Wyatt Dalton. Rebar through his chest when part of the compound collapsed. Pneumothorax, the kind that killed you in minutes if you didn't know what you were doing. Elle knew what she was doing. She'd pinned him against a wall, used her Leatherman to cut the rebar, packed the wound, and performed a needle decompression with hands that didn't shake even when bullets were chipping concrete inches from her skull. Breathe, she'd told him. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're not dying today, Dalton. I don't allow it. He'd laughed, actually laughed, blood on his teeth. Yes, ma'am. The second casualty was Reed Ashford, femoral artery nicked by shrapnel. Bleeding out fast, the kind of fast that meant you had maybe 4 minutes before shock took him and another 2 before his heart stopped trying. Elle had used a bootlace as a tourniquet, her own boot, kicked it off, yanked the lace free, tied it around Ashford's thigh high and tight, and held direct pressure on the wound with her bare hands while she directed another team member to start an IV. 43 minutes of direct pressure, her hands cramping, arms burning. But she didn't let go, couldn't let go, because the second she did, Ashford died. Talk to me, she'd ordered him. Tell me about home. Tell me anything. Stay conscious. He'd told her about his sister. about his nephew who wanted to be a SEAL someday, about a girl he'd met in San Diego who made the best fish tacos he'd ever tasted. He'd talked and talked and talked, while El held his artery closed with nothing but pressure and prayer. The third casualty was Trevor Maddox, shrapnel in his abdomen, potentially catastrophic. El had packed the wound with every piece of gauze she had wrapped him in, an emergency blanket, pumped him full of morphine, and made him promise not to die because she'd already used up her allotment of dead patients for the year. "How many's your allotment?" he'd asked through gritted teeth. "Zero," she'd answered. "I don't do dead patients. Against my religion." The fourth casualty was Dominic Cade. Blast injury, tension pneumothorax, the same injury she'd treated tonight 5 years later in a Chicago ER. She'd taught him the needle decompression technique while treating two other patients simultaneously. Talked him through landmarks angle depth. Cade had done it himself, handshaking but precise. "Good man," El had said. "Now you know how to save your own life. You're welcome." There were three more after that: burns, fractures, one traumatic amputation that El managed with a combat tourniquet, and enough morphine to drop a horse administered carefully because too much would stop his breathing and too little would send him into shock. By the time the extraction helo was inbound, El had been working for 6 straight hours. Her hands were covered in blood. Her knees were bruised from kneeling on concrete and rock. She had a concussion from a near-miss explosion that she hadn't mentioned to anyone. 2 cracked ribs from being thrown into a wall. She hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk water, hadn't stopped moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant realizing how bad things were. Cal had coordinated the extraction. Radio finally working again after being jammed. Helo inbound. ETA 90 minutes. Capacity 8 passengers plus crew. 12 men. 1 corpsman. 8 seats. The math was simple and horrible. Cal had pulled El aside, away from the others, his face gray with pain and blood loss. She hadn't treated him yet. He'd refused. "Everyone else first. That's an order, corpsman." "Cal, listen to me." He'd grabbed her shoulders, looked into her eyes with the kind of intensity that made her chest ache. "You need to make the call. Who gets on that helo? Medical priority." "No." El had shaken her head. "No, you make that call. You're the team leader. And you're the corpsman. This is your call." She'd looked around the basement at the men she'd spent 6 hours keeping alive. 7 stable enough to move. 4 critical. 50-50 survival if they stayed, including Cal. Including her fiancé, the man she loved, the man she was supposed to marry on a beach somewhere when all this was over. "The 7 stable ones go," she'd said, voice flat, clinical, because if she let herself feel anything, she'd break. "You stay. You coordinate the defense until the next bird." Cal had nodded. "Good call." "Don't," her voice cracked. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare make this sound reasonable." "It is reasonable. It's the right call, and you know it." He'd pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "I love you, El. I'm so goddamn proud of you. You saved them. All of them. That's what matters. You matter." She'd been crying now silently, tears cutting tracks through the dust and blood on her face. "Cal, you matter. Then honor me. Get on that helo. Get them to surgery. And when you're safe, you tell Colonel Bridger that his training worked. You tell him I made the hard call because he taught me how." The helo had arrived. El had loaded 7 men: Wyatt Dalton, Reed Ashford, Trevor Maddox, Dominic Cade. 3 others whose names she'd recited like a prayer every night for 5 years. Cal had kissed her one last time. "Go, that's an order." She'd gone. In the consultation room, Elle's voice had gone hollow, distant, like she was reporting on someone else's life. The helo lifted off at 0940. I watched the compound get smaller. Watched Cal and the others setting up defensive positions. They had maybe 4 hours until the next extraction window. 23 minutes after we lifted off, I heard the explosion over the radio. Big one. Sounded like an airstrike. The pilot confirmed it. Compound was gone. Everything was gone. Silence. Heavy and suffocating. Dalton's voice cracked. "Doc, we didn't know. We were unconscious for most of the flight. We didn't know you stayed awake. Didn't know you watched." Elle finally looked up. Her eyes were dry now, past tears. The helo crashed 40 minutes later. Secondary RPG strike. Everyone else died on impact. I survived because I was in the back strapped in next to the medical supplies. Crawled 5 miles to friendly lines with a concussion and 2 cracked ribs I'd been ignoring. When they found me, I was delirious, barely conscious. By the time I was coherent enough to give a report, command had already declared the entire mission KIA. It was easier to let them believe it, easier to stay dead. Bridger's voice was gentle. Why stay dead? Because I left him. The words came out raw, broken. I left Cal to die. I got on that helo, and I left him and 4 others to hold a position they couldn't hold, and then I survived when they didn't. What was I supposed to do? Go back and say, sorry, I'm alive, but your son, your brother, your friend is still dead because I made the call to leave him. You followed your team leader's orders, Bridger said. I should have argued harder. Should have found another way. Should have what? Ashford leaned forward, voice intense. Stayed and died with them. Would that have made it better? Would that have honored Lieutenant Brennan's sacrifice, or just wasted it? Elle's hands trembled. You don't understand. We do. Maddox stood up, paced to the window, paced back. Doc, we've all carried this for 5 years, wondering why we lived when Cal and the others didn't, wondering if we deserved it, wondering if we should have fought harder, done more, been better. The answer, Dalton said quietly, is that Lieutenant Brennan made a command decision. He assessed the situation. He determined that 7 critically wounded men needed immediate surgical intervention and 4 less critical casualties could hold for secondary extraction. He was wrong about the timing, but he was right about the priority. That's what leaders do. They make the hard calls. And you, Ashford added, followed his final order. That's what corpsmen do. We serve the mission, even when it kills us. Elle looked at Bridger, really looked at him. Did you know that I was alive? I suspected. Bridger's weathered face showed every one of his 68 years. The official reports didn't match the crash pattern. 1 survivor, medical personnel, female. The math worked, but I respected your choice. You needed time. We all need time after something like that. 5 years is a long time, Colonel. Yes, it is. He reached into his jacket, pulled out something wrapped in cloth, set it on the table between them. I was saving this, waiting for the right moment. Elle stared at the cloth. What is it? Open it. Her hands shook as she unwrapped the cloth. Inside, a set of dog tags, old ones, scratched and worn. The name stamped into the metal made her vision blur. Brennan Callum JLT USNO Pios. He had 2 sets, Bridger said quietly. They gave me these after the memorial service. I kept them safe, because I knew someday you'd come back. And when you did, you'd need to know that he's not forgotten. None of them are forgotten. Elle picked up the tags with trembling hands, held them next to her own. The metal warm from Bridger's pocket from being carried, from being remembered. I don't deserve these, she whispered. That's not your call. Bridger's voice was firm now, teaching voice, the voice that had trained 3 generations of corpsmen. Cal died making sure you'd live, making sure these men would live. Don't dishonor his sacrifice by calling it your failure. Honor it by doing what you've always done. Keep going. Keep saving. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Castellan stuck his head in, looking apologetic and nervous. Sorry to interrupt, but Captain Cade is out of surgery. He's asking for Corpsman Thorne. Elle wiped her eyes, stood. I'll be right there. Castellan hesitated. There's also a situation developing with his post-op care. He's showing signs of early sepsis, fever spiking, white count elevated. We're starting broad-spectrum antibiotics, but I'd value your input given your combat experience. Elle's professional mask snapped back into place. Broad-spectrum won't work. Not if he picked up anything from the environment where he was wounded. Where was he hit? Afghanistan, Kandahar province. Elle was already moving toward the door. The soil composition in that region combined with the specific bacteria present means you're probably looking at Acinetobacter baumannii, maybe MRSA, possibly both. Standard protocols will fail. You need targeted treatment. Castellan followed her out, scribbling notes. How do you know this? Because I've treated it before. Elle was walking fast now, her stride confident, purposeful. In Syria and Yemen, in 3 different locations in Afghanistan, blast injuries in those regions have a signature. The bacteria, the wound patterns, the complications. I can read it. Behind them, the 3 SEALs exchanged looks. Dalton smiled, sad and proud. There she is. There's our doc. Bridger stood slowly watching Elle disappear down the hallway. She never left, he said quietly. She just forgot how to believe in herself. Our job is to remind her. The ICU was quieter than the ER. Subdued lighting, the steady beep of monitors, the soft whoosh of ventilators. Captain Dominic Cade lay in bed, 3 pale but conscious IVs running clear fluids and antibiotics that Elle knew wouldn't work. She approached the bed with Castellan trailing behind. A nurse she didn't recognize, professional and competent, was checking vitals. Captain, Elle said quietly, I hear you're causing trouble already. Cade's eyes opened, focused on her. A weak smile. Ma'am, just couldn't handle you leaving. Your body's fighting an infection. Temperature's 103. How long were you down before extraction? 8 hours, maybe 10. Lost track of time. Elle nodded, looked at the chart, examined the wound site. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking for warmth, swelling the subtle signs that spoke volumes if you knew how to read them. This wound pattern, she said more to herself than anyone else. Entry angle suggests you were prone, taking cover. The fragmentation spread is consistent with pressure plate, IED, probably homemade buried shallow. You hit it or someone near you did. Cade stared. That's exactly right. How did you? I've seen it before. Elle turned to Castellan. The explosion would have thrown soil and debris deep into the tissue. Acinetobacter baumannii thrives in that environment. It's naturally resistant to most antibiotics. Your current treatment won't touch it. Castellan checked his notes. You're suggesting we change his antibiotic regimen based on wound appearance and deployment location. I'm suggesting you run cultures to confirm, but yes, switch him to colistin and take a cyclane combination therapy while we wait for results. If I'm wrong, you lose 12 hours. If I'm right, you save his life. That's a significant deviation from standard protocol. Standard protocol is written for standard wounds. This isn't standard. A voice from behind them. Dr. Castellan. Colonel Bridger stood in the doorway, Dalton Ashford and Maddox flanking him. Permission to speak. Castellan looked overwhelmed. Colonel, this is really a medical decision. I spent 42 years training combat medics. Bridger's voice was respectful but unyielding. I've seen 3 corpsmen in my entire career who could diagnose bacterial infection patterns from wound appearance alone. Corpsman Thorne is one of them. When she tells you what's in that wound, I strongly suggest you listen. Maddox stepped forward. I'm a physician assistant now, doctor. Specialized in infectious disease. Doc Thorne's assessment is consistent with everything I've seen in deployment-related infections. The bacteria in those regions are unlike anything stateside. Castellan looked from Bridger to Maddox to Elle, finally back to Elle. You're that confident? Elle met his eyes. I'm that confident. And if you're wrong, then you can fire me, but I'm not wrong. Castellan held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Change the antibiotic regimen, colistin and tigecycline, and run full cultures. He paused. Also effective immediately, Nurse Thorne is promoted to senior trauma consultant. She'll review all combat-related injuries that come through this ER. Elle blinked. Sir, I'm not qualified. You're overqualified. You just don't have the paperwork to prove it. Castellan looked tired suddenly. Older. I misjudged you, Corpsman Thorne. Badly. I let my ego and my assumptions blind me to what was right in front of me. That ends now. He left. The nurse followed off to implement the new orders. Cade reached out, caught Elle's hand. His grip was weak but determined. Ma'am, I need to tell you something about that night in Syria. Elle's stomach clenched. Dumb, you don't have to. I do. He took a breath. After you left, Lieutenant Brennan and the others held the compound. But a second helo did come, 42 minutes after yours lifted off. I know because command radioed us, told us extraction was inbound for remaining personnel. Elle's world tilted. What? They got Lieutenant Brennan and 2 others out. I heard it on the radio before we went wheels up. But, his voice caught, the helo took fire during extraction. Brennan was hit, again, covering the withdrawal. He made it onto the bird, but he didn't make it to surgery. He died saving his men, Bridger said softly from the doorway. Twice. First when he ordered you onto that helo. Second when he covered the extraction of the others. That wasn't failure, Elle. That was leadership. Elle couldn't breathe. 5 years she'd carried the guilt of leaving Cal behind, of surviving when he didn't. 5 years thinking she'd abandon him to die alone in a burning compound. He chose it, Cade whispered. Twice he chose it. He chose your life. Then he chose theirs. That's what leaders do, ma'am. They choose. And their choices matter because they save people. Elle's knees went weak. Dalton caught her, guided her to a chair. She sat there shaking while 5 years of guilt and grief and survivor's shame crashed over her like a wave. He didn't die because of my call, she whispered. No, Bridger said. He died because of his, and he'd make the same call again, because that's who Cal Brennan was. That's who we taught him to be. Elle looked up at Bridger through tears. How do I carry this? The same way I carried every student I lost. Bridger knelt beside her chair, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. You remember them, you honor them, and you make damn sure their sacrifice teaches the next generation how to survive. You don't carry it as guilt, Elle. You carry it as responsibility, the responsibility to be worthy of what they gave you. I don't know if I can. You already are. He gestured around the ICU. Captain Cade is alive because you diagnosed his injury in 30 seconds. You're about to save him again by treating an infection no one else would have caught. Those 3 men out there in the waiting room named their children after you. Maddox became a PA because you showed him what medicine looks like under fire. Cal's sacrifice didn't end when he died, Ashford said quietly. It keeps going. Through you, through us, through every person you have saved and will save. That's how you honor him. By doing what he gave his life for. You keep saving. Elle looked at the T tags in her hand, Cal's and hers, the metal warming against her palm. 2 names, 2 lives, one ended, one continuing, but both connected, both mattering. She closed her fist around the tags, breathed, 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out. When she opened her eyes, something had shifted, not healed, not fixed, but maybe possibly beginning to transform from open wound into scar tissue. The kind that hurts but doesn't bleed, the kind that reminds you of what you survived. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She stood, wiped her eyes, looked at Cade. Your fever should break within 6 hours if I'm right about the bacteria. If it doesn't, we'll reassess. But you're going to be fine, Captain. I don't allow my patients to die. Cade smiled. Yes, ma'am. Elle turned to leave. Bridger followed her out, the 3 SEALs trailing behind like an honor guard. In the hallway, Elle stopped, turned to face them. Thank you, all of you, for coming, for telling me, for, her voice broke, for not letting me carry this alone anymore. We're a team, Dalton said simply. Teams don't leave people behind, not even when they think they should be left. Elle nodded, started to walk away, then stopped again. Colonel. Yes. Those men in Syria, the 4 who stayed behind with Cal, I need their names. Their families, I need... She struggled with the words. I need to tell them that Cal didn't die alone, that he led until the end, that he died a hero. Bridger's eyes glistened. I'll get you the information. And one more thing. Elle took a breath. I want to teach. Combat medicine. The way you taught me. If there's room at the Naval Medical Center, I want to make sure the next generation knows what I know. Knows what Cal taught me. There's always room, Bridger said, his voice thick with pride. There's always room for people who understand what it means to serve. Elle nodded, started walking again. This time she didn't stop. Behind her, Wyatt Dalton whispered to Reed Ashford, she's coming back. She never left, Ashford answered. She just forgot for a while. But Doc Thorne doesn't stay forgotten for long. And in his ICU bed, Captain Dominic Cade lay watching the monitors beep steadily, his fever already beginning to break, his life saved twice by the same woman 5 years apart. And he smiled because some people were born to be heroes, and some people became heroes, and some people, the rare ones, the special ones, just were heroes without ever trying to be. And Alara Thorne was all 3. 3 hours after midnight, Chicago Memorial's emergency department existed in that strange liminal space between the chaos of Friday night and the exhaustion of Saturday morning. The waiting room had cleared. Most of the staff had rotated home. Only the skeleton night crew remained moving through their routines with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times before. Alara Thorne sat in the staff break room staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Still wearing the same scrubs. Still processing the last 12 hours of her life, unraveling and reforming into something she didn't quite recognize yet. The door opened. Dr. Castellan entered looking as tired as she felt. He poured his own coffee, added cream, stirred it longer than necessary. Finally sat down across from her. Captain Cade's fever broke, he said. 101 and dropping. White count starting to normalize. Cultures came back positive for Acinetobacter baumannii, exactly like you said. Elle nodded, didn't speak. I've been chief of this ER for 8 years, Castellan continued. Trained at Johns Hopkins, did my residency at Mass General. I thought I knew trauma medicine. He laughed bitter and self-aware. Then you diagnosed a resistant bacterial infection from wound appearance and deployment geography. Something that would have taken our lab 3 days to confirm you knew in 30 seconds. Pattern recognition, Elle said quietly. You see enough of them, you learn to read the signs. How many did you see in combat? Elle finally looked at him. Enough. They sat in silence. The coffee maker gurgled. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily. I owe you more than an apology, Castellan said. I owe you the truth. When I saw you tonight, really saw you working on Captain Cade with that kind of precision and confidence, I realized something. You weren't hiding because you were incompetent. You were hiding because you were too competent. Because if people saw what you could really do, they'd ask questions you didn't want to answer. Elle's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. I just wanted to be invisible. Why? Because visible people get asked to do hard things. And I was done doing hard things. Castellan nodded slowly. But you did them anyway. Tonight, when it mattered. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You chose to step into that chaos when Captain Cade was fighting off security. You chose to perform that needle decompression when I was about to make a fatal mistake. You chose to save him. Castellan leaned forward. The question is, will you keep choosing or will you go back to hiding? Before Elle could answer, the break room door burst open. Jennifer, one of the night nurses, the same one who'd called Elle Mouse Girl 6 hours ago. Her face was pale, eyes wide. We need Corman Thorne now, patient in Bay 7, combat veteran, late 60s, full cardiac arrest with PTSD component. Nothing's working. He's dying and he keeps fighting us, and we don't know what to do. Elle was on her feet before Jennifer finished speaking. Moving fast, professional mode engaged. The part of her that had spent 5 years dormant, suddenly awake and absolutely necessary. Base 7 was controlled chaos. An older man on the gurney, chest compressions, ongoing monitors screaming. But something was wrong. Elle saw it immediately. The man was conscious, partially conscious. Eyes rolling, hands grabbing at the people trying to save him, mouth forming words nobody was hearing. Stop compressions, Elle ordered. The resident doing compressions looked up confused. What, he's in cardiac arrest? Stop, now. The resident stepped back. The man on the gurney gasped, coughed, his hands clutching at empty air like he was drowning. Elle moved to his side, placed one hand on his chest, gentle but firm. Lean had close enough that he could see her and face focus on her, instead of whatever demons were circling him. Sir, she said, voice calm and steady, you're stateside. You're in Chicago. The year is 12. You're safe. His eyes locked onto hers, wild, terrified, seeing something that wasn't there. Elle recognized the look, had seen it before, in mirrors, in the faces of men she'd treated who were physically present, but mentally still downrange, still in the fight, still dying in places that existed only in memory. Listen to my voice, she continued. Feel the bed under you. It's a hospital bed. Soft, clean, not dirt, not sand. You can feel it, can't you? His breathing started to slow, just slightly. His hands stopped grabbing. That's good. You're doing good. Now I need you to tell me where you served. What unit? What year? His mouth moved, voice like gravel. First Cavalry, 68. Thank you for your service, sir. I'm Hospital Corpsman Ilara Thorne, Navy. I've been down to range too. I know where you are right now in your head. I know it feels real, but it's not real anymore. That was then. This is now. You're safe. His eyes cleared, just a fraction, but enough. El looked at the monitor bar. His heart rhythm was irregular, stress-induced, the kind that came from psychological trauma, triggering physical crisis. Not a true cardiac arrest. A panic attack so severe, his body was shutting down. This isn't a full code situation, she said to the team. This is PTSD-triggered cardiac event. We need to bring him down gently. No aggressive intervention. Minimal sedation. Grounding techniques first. The resident looked skeptical. That's not protocol. Protocol doesn't account for combat trauma. El's voice carried authority now. Not harsh, just absolute. Trust me, I've done this before. She worked for the next 20 minutes, talking the veteran through grounding exercises, describing the room in detail, having him focus on physical sensations. Small dose of sedative, just enough to take the edge off, not enough to disconnect him from reality. Breathing techniques. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out. Slowly and possibly, the man's vitals stabilized. Heart rate dropping from 140 to 120 to 105. Blood pressure normalizing, the panic leaving his eyes degree by degree until he was just an old man in a hospital bed, exhausted and confused but alive. What's your name, sir? El asked gently. Frank Morrison. El's breath caught. Morrison. The same last name as Cal's. Probably no relation, common enough name, but still. Well, Frank Morrison, you're going to be okay. We're going to keep you overnight for observation. Make sure your heart's stable, and I'm going to recommend you talk to someone about what you're experiencing, someone who specializes in combat trauma. Frank's weathered hand reached out, caught hers. His grip was weak but determined. You've been there. Wherever I was, you've been there too. Yes, sir. How do you live with it? El thought about Cal, about Syria, about 5 years of hiding and 3 hours of being found. You find people who understand, and you let them help carry it. That's how. Frank nodded, closed his eyes. Thank you, Corpsman. El stood, her knees shaky, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her hollow and exhausted. She turned to find the entire night staff staring at her. And standing in the doorway, having witnessed everything, were Colonel Bridger Wyatt, Dalton Reed Ashford, and Trevor Maddox. Dalton stepped forward slowly. Doc, that was what she does, Bridger finished. What she's always done. See a problem, fix it, save the person everyone else has given up on. The resident who'd been doing compressions approached El, looking young and uncertain. I'm sorry, I should have listened. I almost killed him with aggressive treatment. You didn't know, El said. Now you do. Combat trauma presents differently. Physical symptoms mask psychological causes. You have to treat the whole person, not just the vital signs. Will you teach us? The resident's voice was earnest. Will you teach us how to recognize this? El looked at Bridger. He nodded, barely perceptible. Yes, El said quietly. Yes, I'll teach you. Dr. Castellan emerged from the crowd. Effective immediately, Corpsman Thorne will lead weekly trauma seminars, combat-related injuries and PTSD presentations, mandatory attendance for all ER staff. He looked at El. If you're willing. I'm willing. Good. Castellan's voice carried through the department. I also want it noted for the record in front of everyone here that I was wrong about you. Completely, utterly wrong. I judged based on appearance and assumption. I treated you with disrespect. I allowed my staff to mock you. That ends now. Not just because of what you did tonight, but because it should never have started in the first place. Silence. Heavy and meaningful. Jennifer stepped forward, the nurse who'd made squeaking sounds, who'd called El Mouse. Her face was red with shame. I'm sorry, we're sorry. We were cruel and we were wrong, and there's no excuse for it. El looked at her, at all of them. People who'd made her life miserable for months because she'd let them, because being invisible meant enduring their contempt, because it was easier than being seen. I understand, Ella said finally. I wasn't who I appeared to be, but that doesn't excuse how I was treated. It just explains why I allowed it. She took a breath. Moving forward, we start fresh. All of us. The person I was before doesn't exist anymore. The person I'm becoming is still figuring herself out. But she's done hiding. Murmurs of agreement. Relief. The kind that comes when a wrong starts to be made right. Bridger moved through the crowd, Dalton, Ashford, and Maddox following like an honor guard. Captain Cade is awake. He's asking for you. Says there's something he needs to do. L's stomach tightened. Is he okay? Physically, yes, but I think this is about something else. The ICU was quiet, most patients sleeping. The kind of manufactured peace that hospitals created with dimmed lights and hushed voices and the constant awareness that death was always one monitor alarm away. Captain Dominic Cade was sitting up in bed, still pale but stronger. The IV antibiotics working, his fever broken, eyes clear and focused in a way they hadn't been earlier. When L entered, followed by Bridger and the three SEALs, Cade straightened, winced at the movement but pushed through it. Ma'am, he said, Colonel, I need to do something. Need witnesses. Dom, you should be resting. This can't wait. He looked at the others. Dalton, Ashford, Maddox, formation. The three men moved automatically. Muscle memory, lined up beside Cade's bed, standing at attention, despite their civilian clothes, despite the hospital setting, despite everything. Cade pushed himself further upright, ignoring the pain, ignoring the IV lines and monitor leads. With tremendous effort, he maneuvered his legs over the side of the bed, stood wobbling slightly. Captain, sit down, L started forward. You're in no condition. Ma'am, Cade's voice was steady despite his physical state. With respect, I'm in exactly the right condition. Because if I don't do this now, I might not get another chance. He straightened as much as his injuries allowed, brought his right hand up in a formal salute, holding it despite the visible tremor in his arm. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Elora Thorne, he said, voice carrying the weight of ceremony and history and 5 years of grief. For actions above and beyond the call of duty in Syria, December 2019. For treating 8 critically wounded personnel under sustained enemy fire. For demonstrating extraordinary skill, courage, and dedication to the preservation of life. For making the impossible call and saving 7 men when saving all 12 was not possible. His voice caught. For carrying the weight of that decision so we wouldn't have to. For sacrificing your own peace so we could have ours. For staying dead so we could live without guilt. Tears streamed down his face now. And for coming back. For saving me again. For teaching us that ghosts can return. That the dead can rise. That second chances are real. Dalton stepped forward, saluted. For teaching me that being small doesn't mean being weak. That 5'4" can hold up the world if it needs to. Ashford joined them. For holding my artery closed for 43 minutes. For talking to me about fish tacos and San Diego while keeping me alive. For making me believe I mattered. Maddox, youngest of them, saluted last. For showing me what medicine looks like when you strip away everything except the mission. For inspiring me to become what you already were. For proving that healers can be warriors too. Bridger moved to stand with them. 68 years old, chest full of ribbons from wars spanning decades. His salute was perfect, practiced the gesture of a lifetime of military service. For being the finest corpsman I trained in 42 years, Bridger said, his voice thick with emotion. For proving that my training meant something. For honoring Lieutenant Callum Brennan's sacrifice by living a life worthy of it. For teaching me that even old soldiers have things to learn from young ones. The ICU had gone completely silent. Nurses in the doorway, other patients awake and watching. The night shift supervisor with her hand over her mouth. 5 men standing at attention. 5 men saluting. 5 men bearing witness to something that should have happened 5 years ago, but was happening now finally in a Chicago ICU at 4 in the morning. Elle stood frozen. The weight of their recognition, their respect, their love pressing down on her like a physical force. I don't deserve this, she whispered. That's not your call, Cade said. We're making it. We're choosing to honor you. The way you honored us by keeping us alive. The way Lieutenant Brennan honored all of us by making the hard call. That's what this is. Honor recognizing honor. Elle's hands shook. She looked at each of them. At Cade, who she'd treated twice 5 years apart. At Dalton, who she'd held together with her bare hands. At Ashford, whose arteries she'd clamped for 43 minutes. At Maddox, who'd become a healer because of her. At Bridger, who'd taught her everything and was still teaching her now. Slowly trembling, Elle brought her own hand up, returned their salute. Not perfect, her hand shaking, tears streaming down her face, but real, honest, acceptance. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me, for remembering, for not letting me disappear. One by one, other people in the ICU began to stand. Frank Morrison, the veteran Elle had saved an hour ago, pushed himself upright in his bed, raised a shaking hand in salute. A nurse whose father had served in Desert Storm saluted. The night shift supervisor whose brother was Army saluted. A patient in the corner, former Marine oxygen line still in his nose, saluted. Within 30 seconds, 15 people were standing, hands raised bearing witness to something larger than protocol or rank or the normal rules that govern hospital life. They were honoring the hidden soldier, the ghost medic, the woman who'd carried her dead for 5 years and was finally being allowed to lay them down. Dr. Castellan appeared in the doorway, looked at the scene, at Elle standing in the center of all these salutes with tears streaming down her face and her hand raised in acknowledgement. He'd served too, Elle suddenly knew. Saw it in the way he stood, the way his spine straightened, the way recognition flashed across his face. Castellan brought his hand up, held it steady. The salutes lasted for 60 seconds, maybe longer. Time became fluid, meaningless, measured only in heartbeats and the quiet sound of people breathing and the knowledge that something profound was happening. Finally, Cade lowered his hand. The others followed, the moment breaking gently like dawn instead of explosion. Cade swayed. Elle lunged forward, caught him, guided him back to the bed. Sit down before you fall down, Captain. You've done enough heroics for one night. He smiled exhausted. Yes, ma'am. Elle checked his vitals. Fever still down, heart rate elevated from exertion but stable. You're lucky you didn't tear your stitches. Worth it. Worth what? Proving you're stubborn. Worth seeing you accept who you are. Cade's eyes were serious now. You're Doc Thorne, ma'am. You always were. You just needed reminding. Elle adjusted his IV, avoided his eyes. I'm still figuring out what that means. It means you stop hiding. It means you teach others what you know. It means you honor the dead by living for them. He caught her hand. And it means you forgive yourself for surviving when they didn't. Elle's throat closed. I don't know how to do that. You learn, Bridger said from beside her. Same way you learned everything else, one day at a time, with people who understand, with a mission that matters. Speaking of missions, Dalton stepped forward. We have a proposal. They gathered in the consultation room again. 6 a.m. now. The sun starting to rise over Chicago, painting the windows gold. Dalton spoke first. We've spent the last 5 years honoring your memory, Doc, memorial services, scholarship fund in your name at the Naval Academy. We funded training programs for female corpsmen. We did everything we could to make sure people knew who you were and what you did. But now you're alive, Ashford continued, which means we can do better. We can make sure your experience, your knowledge, your skills get passed on directly. Not as memory, as living teaching. Maddox pulled out a tablet, brought up a presentation. We've been working on this for 3 years. Combat Medicine Institute, private nonprofit, focuses on training civilian emergency personnel to handle combat-related trauma, PTSD presentations, blast injuries, everything you know and we've learned. We have funding, Dalton said. We have facilities. We have military approval and civilian partnerships with major hospital systems. What we don't have is someone to run it, someone with real combat experience, real teaching ability, real moral authority. They all looked at Elle. We want you, Graham, Ashford said simply. We want Doc Thorne to build something that saves lives, not just now, for the next 50 years, training people the way Colonel Bridger trained you. Elle stared at the tablet, at the facility plans, the curriculum outlines, the budget projections, at something real and concrete and possible. I'm not qualified to run an institute. You have more real combat medical experience than instructors with 20 years on faculty, Bridger said. And I'll help. I'm too old for active teaching, but I can consult, guide, make sure we're building something that honors what we've learned. Why me? Elle looked at them bewildered. Why not someone with credentials, with degrees, with... Because you've been to the place where all that academic knowledge becomes real, Maddox interrupted. You've held men together while they were dying. You've made impossible calls. You've carried the weight of those decisions. That's not something you learn in a classroom. That's something you earn in blood. And because, Dalton added quietly, Lieutenant Brennan would want this. He believed in training and preparation, in making sure the next generation was ready for what we faced. This is how we honor him, by making sure his death taught something lasting. Elle looked down at her hands, at the dog tags around her neck, Cal's and hers, metal warm against her skin. She thought about Syria, about the compound, about 7 men lifted out and 4 left behind, about Cal ordering her onto that helo, about 5 years of hiding, about tonight stepping back into the fire because someone needed her. I'll need help, she said finally. I can't do this alone. You won't be alone, Bridger promised. We're a team. Teams don't abandon their people. And you'll need to be visible, Ashford said. No more hiding. This only works if people see you know you learn from you directly. Elle's stomach clenched. Visible. The thing she'd avoided for 5 years. The thing that terrified her more than combat ever had. What if I'm not ready? Then you'll get ready, Bridger said. Same way you got ready for everything else. You'll train, you'll practice, you'll do the hard thing because it's the right thing. He smiled, gentle and proud. That's who you are, little Thorn. That's who you've always been. Elle looked at each of them, at the men she'd saved, at the mentor who'd shaped her, at the future they were offering. She thought about the staff break room where Dr. Castellan had asked if she'd keep choosing to do hard things or go back to hiding. She thought about Frank Morrison, the vet, who'd asked how you live with combat trauma, and her answer, you find people who understand and let them help carry it. She thought about Cal, who'd made the hard call because it was right, who trusted her to honor his sacrifice by living a life worthy of it. Okay, Elle whispered, then stronger. Okay, yes, I'll do it. The room erupted, Dalton hugging Ashford, Maddox pumping his fist, Bridger smiling wider than Elle had ever seen. We start in 3 months, Dalton said, pulling up schedules. That gives you time to finish here, to transition, to prepare. First class of students arrives in June, Maddox added. 20 trainees, mix of military corpsmen and civilian paramedics. You'll teach them what you know. We'll build from there. And in the meantime, Bridger said, you stay here at Chicago Memorial. You teach those weekly seminars. You help Dr. Castellan rebuild his trauma protocols. You get comfortable being visible again. Elle nodded, overwhelmed but determined. And Cal's family, the families of the others who died in Syria, I still need to... I'll arrange it, Bridger said gently. When you're ready, when you can face them without it destroying you, they'll understand. They'll want to hear from you. Will they forgive me? There's nothing to forgive, but yes, they will. 3 weeks later, Elle drove to Portland, Oregon. The Brennan family home sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, turning gold in early spring. White picket fence, American flag by the door, the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and children rode bikes without fear. Elle sat in her rental car for 10 minutes, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. The dog tags around her neck felt like they weighed 100 pounds. Cal's and hers, metal, pressed together. She forced herself out of the car, walked up the path, rang the bell. Martha Brennan answered, 62 years old. Silver hair, Cal's blue eyes, his strong jaw softened by years and grief. She looked at Elle for one long, terrible moment, then pulled her into a hug that smelled like lavender and coffee and something that might have been forgiveness. You're so young, Martha whispered against Elle's hair. Oh, honey, you're so young. Cal told us about you in his letters. Said you were 5 feet of pure stubbornness and the bravest person he had ever met. Elle couldn't speak, could only stand there being held by the mother of the man she'd loved and left behind. Cal's father emerged from the living room. Robert Brennan, 65, former Marine, steel gray, hair shoulders that still carried decades of service and loss. He extended his hand, his grip trembled slightly. Thank you for coming, he said, voice rough, for telling us the truth. They sat in the living room, photos of Cal everywhere, baby pictures, high school football, Naval Academy graduation, one of him in full combat gear, young and proud and alive. Elle told them everything. The compound, the ambush, 6 hours of holding men together while the world tried to tear them apart. The extraction helo, 8 seats, 12 men. The math that had no right answer. Cal's order, his voice when he said it, the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd kissed her forehead and told her to honor him by living. He died making sure 7 men lived. Elle said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. And then when the second helo came, he died again, covering their extraction. Taking fire meant for them. He chose it. Twice. Both times he chose to save others. Martha's hands shook as she held a tissue. He loved you so much. Did he tell you? Did you know? He told me. Elle's voice broke. Every day. Not in words always, but I knew. He was going to propose. Robert's voice was quiet. Had the ring picked out. Showed it to me before deployment. Said he was going to do it proper when you both got home. On a beach somewhere. At sunset. Elle closed her eyes. Didn't know. Hadn't known. 5 years of carrying his death, and she hadn't known he'd picked out a ring. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. No. Martha moved to sit beside her, took her hands. You listen to me, Alara Thorne. My son was a leader, a damn good one. He made a command decision. He assessed the situation and he chose. That's what we taught him. That's what the Corps taught him. You didn't fail him. You honored him by following his order. But he died. He died a hero, twice over. Once making sure you and 7 others got out. Once making sure 2 more men got extracted. Martha's grip tightened. That's not loss, sweetheart. That's legacy. That's exactly who he was, who he wanted to be. Robert stood, walked to a bookshelf, returned with a small box. Inside a photograph. Cal in uniform, young face, serious eyes full of the confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were. On the back, in Cal's handwriting, 4L, when I make it home, this goes in our house. When we have one, love you always. CB. Martha placed it in Elle's trembling hands. He wrote that the night before the mission. Like he knew. Her voice caught. Keep it. Build that house he wanted. Fill it with the life he bought you. That's how you honor him. Elle stayed 3 hours. They showed her more photos. Told her stories. Cal as a boy who brought home stray dogs. Cal as a teenager who drove too fast and laughed too loud. Cal as a man who believed in duty and honor and doing hard things because they were right. When she finally left, Martha walked her to the car, pressed an envelope into her hands. Read it later, when you're ready. Elle opened it that night in her hotel room. Inside a handwritten note on Martha's stationery, Alara, you gave us 5 more years with our son. You kept him alive when everything said he should die. You got him on that second helo. You gave him the chance to save 2 more men before he went. That's not failure. That's a gift. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for honoring him. Thank you for living the life he bought you. Keep saving them, sweetheart. Make him proud. With love, Martha and Robert Brennan. Elle pressed the note to her chest and wept. Not from guilt this time. From something else. Something that felt almost like peace. 6 months later. The Combat Medicine Institute occupied a converted medical training facility outside Virginia Beach, close enough to Naval Medical Center Portsmouth for collaboration, far enough for independence. 23 students in the first class, not 20. 3 more had applied after word spread about who was teaching. They'd made room. Hospital corpsman, second class, Alara Thorne, 28 years old but looking older, now that she'd stopped hiding, stood at the front of the classroom in Navy utilities. Instructor's badge on her chest. Dog tags visible. 2 sets, hers and Cal's. Combat medicine, she began, is not about heroics. It's not about glory. It's about making impossible decisions under impossible circumstances and living with those decisions afterward. The students watched rapt. Half of them had heard stories. The ghost medic. Operation Sandstorm. 12 men saved. 5 left behind. The corpsman who died and came back. You're going to lose people, Elle continued. No matter how good you are, how fast you work, how much you care. Some patients will die. That's not failure. That's mathematics. That's combat. She paused, looked at each student. The question is not whether you'll lose people. The question is whether you'll honor them by learning from them, by being better for the next patient, by carrying their memory forward as lessons instead of burdens. In the back of the room, Colonel Bridger watched arms crossed, proud smile on his weathered face. Beside him, Wyatt, Dalton, Reed Ashford, and Trevor Maddox, guest lecturers, living proof of what good training could do. And in the front row, special observer, Captain Dominic Cade, recovered fully, back with his team. But here today because he'd promised Doc Thorne he'd attend her first class. Elle walked them through triage, through treatment priorities, through the impossible math of who lives and who dies when you can't save everyone. During break, a young female corpsman approached. 22, blonde, small, reminded Elle of herself 10 years ago. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you deal with being small, with people underestimating you because you're a woman, because you're not physically imposing?" Elle smiled, remembered Bridger's words from training. "You make it your edge. Let them underestimate you. Then you save their lives and make them realize their assumptions were wrong. Every single time you prove them wrong. Until being underestimated becomes their problem, not yours." The corpsman nodded, eyes shining. "Thank you, ma'am." After class, Bridger approached. "First day, how do you feel?" "Terrified," Elle admitted. "But good, like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing." "You are." He handed her an envelope. It's from Cal's mother. Elle's hands shook taking it. She'd visited the Brennan family 2 months ago, hardest thing she'd ever done. Sitting across from Cal's parents, telling them how their son died, how he'd chosen to stay behind, how he'd made the call that saved 7 men. His mother had cried. Then she'd hugged Elle and said, "Thank you for loving him. Thank you for honoring him. Thank you for living the life he bought you." Elle opened the envelope now. Inside, a single photograph. Cal in uniform, smiling, young and alive, and full of the confidence that came from knowing who you were and what you stood for. On the back, handwritten, "Keep saving them, love the Brennans." Elle pressed the photo to her chest, breathed. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out. "You okay?" Bridger asked. "Yeah." Elle looked at her classroom, at her students, at the future she was building from the ashes of her past. "Yeah, I'm okay." That evening, Chicago Memorial. Elle still taught there twice a month, still consulted on complex cases. Dr. Castellan had offered her a permanent position. She declined, but she came back, because this place was where she'd stopped hiding, where she'd been found. She was reviewing charts in the break room when Jennifer, the nurse who'd once called her mouse, brought her coffee. "Heard your institute's first class went well." "It did, thanks." "You know," Jennifer said, sitting down, "I tell that story now. About the night Captain Cade came in, about how we all missed who you were. I tell it to every new nurse who starts here. Why? Because it matters. Because you never know who someone really is just by looking. Because quiet doesn't mean weak and small doesn't mean incapable." Jennifer smiled. "Because sometimes the most important people in the room are the ones nobody's looking at." Elle smiled back. "That's a good lesson. I learned it from you." After Jennifer left, Elle sat alone with her coffee and her memories and the future she was still figuring out how to inhabit. Her phone buzzed. Text from Dalton. Photo attached. His daughter Alara, now 5, wearing a tiny Navy uniform for Halloween. Caption: "She says she wants to be a combat medic when she grows up. Like her namesake, no pressure." Elle laughed, sent back, "Tell her she can be anything she wants, but if she chooses medicine, I'll be honored to teach her." Another text. This one from Cade. "Doc, we have a new corpsman in the team. Young, scared, needs mentoring. Can I send him your way?" Elle typed, "Anytime. We take care of our people." She stood, stretched, prepared to head home to the small apartment near the Institute, the place she'd finally allowed herself to call home instead of hiding place. On her way out, she passed the memorial wall. Chicago Memorial kept photos of staff who'd served in the military. Someone had added her picture there. Official Navy photo from 2019. Young face, serious eyes. The woman she'd been before Syria. Below it, a small plaque, HM2 Alara Thorne, USN, Combat Medic, Operation Sandstorm, Syria 2019. She kept the faith. Elle touched the plaque. Whispered words only she could hear. "I'm keeping it, Cal. Every day. I'm keeping it." Then she walked out into the Chicago night, no longer invisible, no longer hiding, no longer haunted. Just a Laura Thorne, corpsman, teacher, survivor. The woman who'd been a ghost and learned to be human again. The woman who'd carried the dead until she learned how to live for them. The woman who'd proven that sometimes the hardest thing isn't dying for someone, it's living for them